Sam Turner, thank you for joining me today on Acquiring Minds.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here. Been a fan of the show.
Awesome. I love that. Sam, you left a successful corporate career to go out and buy small businesses. Now, that is a familiar pattern among my guests, so you are in good company here on Acquiring Minds, but still a highly unusual and adventurous path to take. So we want to hear your story and what you're up to. Also, you're English, doing this in England. So many non-American listeners and American listeners alike are going to be curious and eager to hear how you finance your acquisitions in an environment where you don't have the SBA, which is this great luxury that we have here in the States. So we will spend some time on that. But start us off, Sam, with your background and what it was that led you to want to go out and buy HVAC businesses.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Will, and thanks again for having me. So I actually started my career when I left school playing professional football, which is soccer for you guys, but professional football here in the UK. And I say that because I did that for a couple of years. I wasn't in the end good enough, and that taught me sort of a lesson about I saw my friends doing well, and I wanted to succeed at something, and that I think it was a turning point in my life to be driven by something and really wanting to succeed. And I always say to people, it's not that I have any more capability than anyone else in terms of the career. It's because I probably wanted it more than others for probably that reason. So I left that. And I had a career within the tourism or travel industry with some pretty large travel providers or travel players here in Europe. I qualified as an accountant, so I have that, let's say, string to my bow, did various finance roles. I got to move to Spain, so I spent 10 years living in Spain, which was fantastic. A few months living in Singapore, which was also brilliant. And then the last 4 years living in Switzerland, which was fantastic. And I moved back here to the UK only 10, 11 months ago. So I was responsible in the end through a number of different roles, but FD, CFO roles of what was multi-billion dollar or euro, as we were based in Europe, businesses that were part of a listed business, but then it was sold to private equity for considerable sum. We then set about actually acquiring our two largest competitors and integrating three businesses at the same time, which is a challenge, and that's taught me something about what I want to do or what I don't want to do in terms when it comes to the strategy for the group going forward. So I don't have any intention of integrating these businesses together. Partly from my experience of what happened, which was quite painful. But there is sometimes value to be had, but I think that you can also destroy a lot of value. Anyway, so through that process, we went from being a €3 billion company in terms of sales to about 6 billion. We're combining the three businesses together. It's a pretty big business. But it was through that integration process really that I decided that I didn't want to stay. I didn't want to spend the rest of my career in the corporate world. And I think that was for probably three reasons. One, I was on a plane every week. So I was living in Switzerland. I had two young children, and being on a plane every week just became not where I wanted to spend my time, away from my family, my wife and my kids.
So you were living in Switzerland, but traveling out of Switzerland or around Switzerland. Okay.
Yeah. So we had a global business. So we had offices all over the world, and I was responsible for the sort of global commercial functions, and we had close to a couple of thousand people in those functions, but located literally in over 100 countries, and we had offices in, I don't know, something like 60 countries or something like that. So it was a fairly not tedious, because it's great to travel, but when you do it for so long and you have actually young ones at home, etc., it becomes tedious, even though initially it seemed to be glamorous. So yes, I was on a plane from Switzerland going to and from different places. One of the other sort of factors, so two other factors, one was the travel, one was the fact that there was actually a lot of politics in the organization. So there was a lot of pressure to obviously deliver results. We had management consultants all over the place, which added to the sort of tension and discussions with maneuvering and all this kind of stuff. So we had effectively the McKinsey consultants, which are one of the large ones for the best part of 2 years with us. So the politics I didn't enjoy at all, and the last one was for me probably I didn't agree with the direction of the business in terms of where it was going, and I also felt like I wasn't able to make the decision. So I was responsible for or accountable for a large chunk of the P&L, of the sales and the margin of the P&L, but I couldn't actually make sort of key decisions with regards to certain things that I wanted to do. And I think that sort of culminated in, for me, a period where I really didn't enjoy being in that corporate culture. And I really sort of reflected hard on that and thought, I need to do something else. And thankfully, I agreed amicable terms to leave, which was great. And I still, have a lot of respect for the guys leading that business and still keep in contact. I then took some time to think, reflect, which I'd never had in my career, because you're always kind of running 100 miles an hour to get to the next leg on the corporate ladder, so to speak. And I really took time, probably 3 to 6 months, to step back and really think about what it was that I wanted to do. What was my purpose in life? I sort of did a lot of reading, reflection, speaking to different people. And I got some clarity on what it is that I wanted to do. What did I want to achieve? What was my life about? And where did I want to spend my time? And it's through that period of time that I decided that I wanted to build a group of companies, but not just for the sake of the financial implications of doing that, which is obviously part of it, but more because I wanted to create a platform for small businesses to prosper and to be actually stronger as being part of that platform. I like working with small business. A lot of my clients effectively were small owner-managed business. So despite we were a large corporate, we worked closely with small businesses, helping them grow. So I love that aspect. I love growth and looking for ways to grow businesses, and I love developing people and management teams. And these are probably my two passions. So it's developing the growth in the business and the growth in the people involved in the business. And I just felt that this ticked all my boxes in terms of flexibility, working when I want to kind of work on my terms, having control, being able to make the decisions, and spending time on where I'm investing my time on things that I actually like doing.
When you spent those 3 or 6 months doing the kind of introspection and figuring out how you wanted to spend your life, did you just answer this question? I wanted to ask you what the answer to that process was. What was this deep, what was going to be your why, or how you wanted to spend the second big chapter of your career? Was it what you just said, or was there something even more underlying that came out of that process of introspection?
Yeah, I mean, what I came up with is almost a purpose, and the purpose is around being able to influence, inspire, and empower and help other people. That's kind of that's the underlying concept. But then I have a number of strands to, well, how does that look? And it's the different sort of different areas of my life, the most important things, and what does that look like in each of those boxes? And this fits within. It ticks a lot of those boxes in terms of where this fits. So, for example, I have the boxes around health and fitness, which is I think critical and a fundamental aspect of, for me, being successful. And if you're not focused on exercising and whatever, which I don't do enough, but I think I start to feel less productive, etc. So that is a kind of that's one. But family and friends, in terms of being able to spend the time with them, creating wealth. And for me, creating wealth is not about buying the next yacht or Lamborghini. For me, I have a very clear ambition to help a number of people with that wealth in a certain sort of place that's important to me.
What do you mean there, Sam? You mean you have a very specific project or a recipient
Yeah,
of this future wealth?
yeah. So I have in my own mind, or not in my own mind, it's clearly written down. I have it all documented in terms of a targeted, let's say, number of people and what I want to do with that in a particular country that's important to me, that I spend a lot of time in. And therefore, it's kind of almost like the numbers are worked out also in a way that says, well, I can help this many people if I've got this amount of wealth built, if that makes sense. So
yeah.
So I guess wealth creation is important, but it's not important for me in the sense of having the latest stuff, or even for a legacy for my family, or in terms of handing it down, which I'm not clear about, what's the right thing there or not in terms of kids, but more about, for me, it's very clear about, can I influence, and can I add, and can I contribute significantly in the world, and that's effectively what I want to do. Yeah.
It's funny because you're I assume you had a great salary while you were running these divisions within a multi-billion pound company. Excuse me, euro company. I guess it was a European company.
Yeah.
But this wealth creation that you're talking about is I guess tied to your latest endeavor, which we're still haven't started yet. We're going to get into. But you're just talking about it very confidently. Like you just know you're gonna you just kind of know you're gonna build wealth. It's like a foregone conclusion.
I think so, and I think I even challenged myself to say, am I thinking big enough? And I think that's part of sort of a key aspect is spending time, obviously, in the right circles with the right people, and getting inspired, and continually challenging yourself to think big. And it's almost like that for me. There's risk in what we do, and we'll talk about that in terms of some of the challenges involved in doing it. But I think my honest opinion is what I want to do, and the wealth that should come along with that is I don't see as terribly complex. I don't see as I mean, for me, it's relatively simple. It doesn't mean to say it's easy to do. It's hard work, but it's not complicated to do. So I can understand very clearly A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and actually that gets delivered. And I'm very clear on, well, let's deliver A, let's deliver B, let's deliver C. So yeah, I'm not saying it's going to be a foregone conclusion, but yeah, I feel like that will happen, and that's my strong belief. Yeah.
And that belief or that playbook, and that kind of, it's going to be hard, but it's simple to follow as long as you stick to the plan. Is that specifically this entrepreneurial venture that we're talking about? That basically the plan you're talking about, the playbook you're talking about, is buying HVAC business 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. That they're one and the same. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So what I have in terms of what I think is important, that people don't talk about money very much, especially here in the UK. Maybe I think it's different in the US. I think you're a bit more open with that, and I think people are a bit prudish here to talk about. Like, I have a target to create a net worth of X by Y date, and I have a very clear, and I don't mind to explain to people, because for me it's not about being boastful. It's about almost creating accountability. Because if I tell my wife and my friends or my family or whatever, look, this is what I want to do because that enables me to do this, then if I don't deliver that, then I've already communicated that to people. So rather than just, well, let's hope for the best and see where we get. So for me, that's just the way I work. I think those numbers are then worked back to, well, what do we need to deliver from a business case perspective in terms of this, and this would get us pretty much to those numbers in that kind of 5-year kind of timescale that we're talking about.
And are these numbers, these very specific numbers, both your goal and how you get there? Is that something you can share? Not in this moment, but in a few minutes.
Yeah, I'm happy to
Awesome.
to kind of give the high level around that. I mean, there's no sensitivity. It's it's my view of the world, and it's what we want to do. I've shared that with investors clearly, because I wanted them to come on board with the journey. I've shared it with lenders, and maybe I shouldn't have shared that with lenders. Maybe I should have shared more conservative view with lenders. But I'll learn from those mistakes. But yeah, I'm happy to go into some detail.
Great. Well, and it's going to be a largely American audience here, so nobody's going to blush when we start talking big numbers. The actual. So you talked about those 3 or 6 months, the process that you went through to arrive at this plan, how this plan and this idea of acquiring businesses was going to really hit in that sweet spot of where your skill set lies. But the very concept of buying small businesses is it's not in the air here. And I think it's probably even less in the air in the UK, at least according to what you told me on our pre-call. So that as a concept, was that where did you get the idea? I mean, you were probably evaluating other things too, like maybe starting a business from scratch. I don't know. So the actual specific idea of buying small businesses, was that your idea? Was it somebody else's? Did you read a book? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so it's a good point. I think you're right. It's even less so in the UK. I was in Switzerland at the time, but clearly most of my network,
right?
Say most of my network, I have network around the world, but most of my friends and people I talk to would be in the UK, so that would be most familiar. And it's not that common, I would say. You're right, and less so in the UK. So I spent a lot of time researching around things, and I was quite big into at one point wanting to do property investing. We have some property investments, and it was through the process of looking and researching in the property space that I uncovered some content around buying businesses. And there was several people that were providing content, so I actually consumed a lot of content from sort of free content, and then I signed up for a few courses as well. Not just the one. I signed up for 2 or 3. I think it was 3 different programs, and so invested in those programs to build my knowledge as much as possible. So it was through there, and it was through one of those programs that I got to meet other people as well, and we sort of created a bit of a group together that met every week, a bit like an accountability group. Bizarrely, I'm also facilitating one of those now as a facilitator, and I had my first kickoff call today, so that was interesting. Good timing. But so we had this kind of accountability group on the back of doing this training program, 3 or 4 days of training in terms of the technical aspects around how to acquire businesses, and therefore a small number of us actually continued to meet together every week, talk about deals, and actually then created the view that we would go into some sort of partnership together by helping and supporting each other. So that's what we did. We set up I would call it a loose partnership, and I'll describe exactly how it works. But we set up a partnership. We have a brand, a website that is Advantos Equity Partners, and what that is effectively is there's 5 of us, 2 in the UK, one in Germany, one in Sweden, and one in Norway, so kind of European. We're also looking for a US based partner to come on board, and what we do is we bring deals and opportunities respectively into that kind of forum, and we agree together whether we will go forward individually, whether other people want to invest in that and come on board to do joint ventures, etc. So that's the kind of loose partnership framework that still means, so for example, in the UK HVAC piece, I said, well, this is what I now want to do. Thankfully, 3 of the other guys wanted to invest something into that, so they're involved from an investment point of view. And one of the others is a non-executive director on the board, effectively, in terms of my group. So they're all quite involved in that. And likewise, the guys are doing some other deals in mostly software and technology based businesses, to be honest, because that's more their background. So we have kind of reciprocal investments in each other's businesses, as well as we share ideas around raising capital or deal structures or whatever. So that's effectively how I sourced the kind of information about that and where the idea came from, and that's how I pursued it. And at the time,
go ahead.
No, at the time I was still in Switzerland, so and at this point we weren't 100% clear where we were going to live, because if things had gone the other way, we would have sold my former business. Maybe I wouldn't have needed to do anything, because we'd had investments in the company as well as part of the management team. But so we weren't sure where we were going to live. So I didn't really act on that for some time until we knew that we were going to come back to the UK, and then I started really doing the search in the UK. But initially, also, I wasn't 100% clear on the sector that I wanted to focus on. So I was a little bit scattergun initially.
Yeah. Well, I want to get into how you chose the industry that you did, but first, I'm just curious about courses, because I'm sure a lot of the audience will be as well, because they're probably looking at the buffet of courses out there and wondering what they should take. Can you share which courses you took and what you thought of them even?
Yes. So I won't talk individually about what I think of each of them, because probably that's maybe not fair to sort of play one off versus the other. But I think I did a course which is like a membership group as well afterwards, called the Harbour Club.
Yeah.
With Jeremy Harbour. I did the Carl Allen course, which is more into the details around leverage buyouts and how to do LBOs. And there's also a guy in the UK, which is probably maybe on the smaller business side, a guy called Jonathan J. So I did some content and courses with those three. I think on the whole, in hindsight, I probably didn't need to do all three, but I think what is useful as part of that is the contacts and the network that you get as part of that. I mean, in the sense I've got partners effectively that I meet with every week. We discuss stuff. I've got someone to talk to about deals. They're investing in my deals. So you build a network. I think that's invaluable, because it can be a bit of a lonely task. Yeah. So that's great. And obviously some of the content. I mean, for me, a lot of the content when it comes to looking at how to structure, for me, then became quite natural. I'd done acquisitions in the past as part of my corporate role, so we'd acquired businesses, so I knew how the process was. I knew how to look at numbers and evaluate whether deals make sense or not, and those sorts of things. So a lot of the content maybe is less relevant for me, but it depends on where everyone's at. But overall, I think that there is value, if not just because of becoming part of a network and having access to people and contacts and skill sets and expertise that you didn't have before.
Yeah. Yeah. And so even though your M&A experience from the corporate life, your corporate world, I assume the size of those deals was something else altogether, the things that you learned through those deals carried through to these relatively tiny acquisitions that you were doing?
Yeah. I mean, I think the basic process, in terms of the stages, the heads of terms or LOI, you guys would say, the DD phase and the different aspects of components of that in terms of financial, legal, tax, commercial, almost people as well, if you want to or you should do that. So they've got a various stages of the process, the share purchase agreement, and all that. I mean, that's the same, really. Yeah. It's the same broad process. And then how to look at whether deals make sense or not from a valuation perspective and from a structure perspective. Again, there's a lot of learnings that you can take. The principles are the same. Obviously, what's very, very different is the way you source deals is completely different. The negotiation process and the importance of actually building relationship, I think, is completely different, because you're typically dealing with people that have never gone through the process before. If you're dealing directly with a business owner that wants to sell, or is prepared to sell, and through the conversation ends up doing that, it's a very different kettle of fish, or a very different I would say kettle of fish, but that's maybe an English term. A very
No,
different scenario.
it works.
Very different scenario, obviously, than a big corporate transaction where
Yeah.
it's 90% about the numbers and the technical aspects.
Yeah. The courses that you named, so you learn about buying a bit. First, you look at property real estate as your path to build wealth, and then you learn about buying businesses, and that just kind of intrigues you more. And that's also got the people aspect.
Exactly. I think I kind of had the two side by side, and I like to do some of the analysis in a fairly structured way. So I probably had some kind of scoring mechanism as to what made more sense based on what sort of criteria. But I think the people aspect, the people aspect is less relevant in property. Property is great, but it's less dynamic, isn't it? I mean, it's probably less interesting. Let's be honest. And I think the upside potential is less, right? Yeah. Also, probably the risk is less. To be frank, I think the risk and return in a small business acquisition perspective is much higher.
Yeah.
And then it's a case of, well, do you back yourself or don't you? And do you have the skills and do you have the belief in what you can do together with a team and the team that you build to make that a success? And I think there's a certain amount that you've got to back yourself. It's not just going to happen. But I think, the people component was probably the biggest element, and being able to work and develop with people was super important to me.
And then, so you take these, you learn about these courses, you take them. I'd heard of Harbour. Sorry, the gentleman's name is Jeremy Harbour.
Yes.
Jeremy Harbour, and the overall brand is called Harbour or what?
Harbour Club.
Harbour Club. Yeah.
Yep.
That was early in my own foray into this world. That came up a lot. I haven't heard much about it later. Probably because that's kind of probably has more of an international clientele and orientation. Jeremy Harbour is himself British, but lives in Singapore or something like that. Do I have that right?
He does. He's just moved to Dubai actually, but yeah. But it is a very international audience and community. So
yeah. And so here in the States, as often happens, we just have a kind of a more insular. We have the common names that are at an American audience, and the Americans do those. Okay. So how do you arrive at the specific plan? Why HVAC? And so tell us why the HVAC industry, and then also tell us about the structure of what you're building and how that plan came together.
Sure. So I think there's two strands to why I landed there. So the first strand is, I talked to a number of businesses. I said initially it was quite a scattergun approach. So I got to speak with businesses in very different sectors. So you then get quickly to learn the environments, the sectors a little bit in a bit more detail, the numbers in a bit more detail, the profiles in a bit more detail. So actually, where you think you can add more value in a bit more detail. So I think typically what I found was there was an opportunity, I think, to potentially add more value in these types of industries that I think typically are run by the engineers that have come up sort of through the ranks. That they were on the tools, and now they've come through and they've kind of reached a plateau. And you see that time and time again. And I heard that in a lot of conversations. And I think then having the skills to kind of see how we can grow the business, I think in that concept, in these types of businesses was really interesting. The second point was the criteria that I had. So I had criteria around, I wanted to build a group. So it needed to be really a large industry, a fragmented industry, a fairly robust industry. So I didn't want to be in a space where, Google or Amazon could come along tomorrow and completely take your business away. Obviously, at the same time, I'm not particularly tech savvy. So whilst I love what technology can do, I'm not very interested in being in the detail of a technology company. And I think to be at the forefront of that, you constantly need to be on the forefront of that because things change so rapidly. So I think I wanted to steer clear of. I wanted to have businesses that had some interesting, I would say, macro trends. And I think the HVAC, if you think about what's happening with the climate, the whole climate agenda, the need to be efficient with energy use, the energy prices, all of that, I think, there's a strong underlying trend to having to have more efficient systems in place. And therefore, for me, I see that as a kind of an overarching macro opportunity or tailwind, if you like, in terms of that space. You got to do it right, and you got to put the jigsaw together correctly. But I think there's an opportunity there as well.
And that's because you perceive that HVAC technology will be evolving rather rapidly to keep up with more energy efficiency, and therefore there will be more spend on new systems, new equipment by consumers.
Absolutely. I think the actual spend in the marketplace will be growing over time. So it might not be a 20% a year growth, but it will be a growing industry because of that macro trend, which is important. I also think there's going to be certain areas of the industry that will benefit more from, for example, government funding or incentives, because governments have a mandate to be, whatever the carbon footprint impacts are. And for example, here in the UK, 95% of homes are fitted with a gas boiler. So to heat your homes is gas. But for new homes, that needs to be, the government have already said, no new homes from 2025 can have a gas boiler. And that's a fundamental shift, for example.
Yeah.
Now, that's one thing. But then what about the next thing will be, we need to retrofit all existing homes with some more efficient energy, because obviously new homes is only a portion. So there was going to be a lot of money that's coming in to sort of incentivize those things to happen. So how you put the piece of the jigsaw together to be at the forefront of that is part of the equation, in part of the overall plan in terms of how we do that. So there's some criteria there. I think the criteria financially is valuations, because there is so much of fragmentation. You've got this real pyramid that the long tail of this pyramid is super long. There's like 38,000 businesses just in the UK HVAC industry.
Wow.
And obviously many of those are very small.
Sure.
But therefore you've got this whole huge long tail of businesses, which means the valuations at that level in the long tail is super low. And you've got then it sort of goes up like that. So there is a natural arbitrage because of that long tail in terms of the pyramid. There is a natural multiple arbitrage opportunity by just putting companies together, not even together, but as part of the same group, because multiples increase as risk reduces. And if you've got 10 businesses in a group, even though they're not one business, the risk is obviously less than buying one business. So
actually, let me dig into that a little bit, Sam, because this was in our pre-call. We talked about this, and it was something that, as I was reviewing our notes, my notes of our call, caught my attention. So, and maybe it's just my lack of sophistication, but my understanding of multiple arbitrage is that the reason that arbitrage exists is because the entrepreneur has assemble these fragmented pieces into something that is now more holistic and integrated. So I thought the whole reason for multiple arbitrage, or the key, one of the key reasons, was that in fact these 10 tiny companies are now one integrated entity earning 10 times the revenue. And so you've got, and with that comes economies of scale, and yes, less risk, as you said, but just, kind of synergies and economies of scale. But you clearly, from your bad experiences in corporate are kind of anti-integration. I don't want to overstate it, but clearly, like you've made this decision. You've now referred to it a couple of times that you're not huge on integration. It almost, it was a really bad experience for you in corporate, and then now in your own endeavor here, you're not trying to integrate. So anyway, square that circle for me. Why
Sure.
You don't need to integrate these companies to optimize your multiple arbitrage?
Sure. So there's a couple of things. Firstly, I think, and just to be clear for anyone listening from my former employer, it's not that I'm saying it was the wrong decision to integrate. It was a painful experience for sure, but the value proposition of those companies was almost identical, and therefore actually integrating probably made sense in that context. What I'm trying to do is buy businesses that are complementary, that have slightly different value propositions, and therefore it doesn't make sense to combine those into one hodgepodge of a company providing 100 different services. There's no focus, there's no accountability, there's no, that just, for me, that just wouldn't work, not just because of the experience that I've gone through. But to answer your point around valuation, I think it's an interesting discussion. For me, I would put the valuation, the multiple when we talk about valuation, down to a number of things. The first is risk. Yeah. So when risk is reduced, multiples increase, which is why obviously people love the recurring revenues. They love the very predictable numbers, and where there's a tailwind, and there's a management team in place, and et cetera, et cetera. So risk is one factor. Now, I think if you have a number of businesses in slightly different, with a slightly different value proposition, servicing slightly different customer bases, etc., that's diversification. So number one, you definitely reduce risk by adding businesses despite you're not integrating. So you reduce the risk, multiple increases. Number two is demand. So on the demand side, if you look at the number of people that are operating in that pyramid, you've not got, that down in that long tail, you've not probably got enough buyers for sellers, because there's just so many, thousands and thousands of businesses that probably most of them too small, won't sell, will end up closing. Obviously, when you get north of probably £2 million EBITDA, you then start to get interest from institutional players and small niche private equity, etc. So that increases the demand for those businesses. So those two factors, you will increase the multiple as a result of those two things alone. The third point I think that impacts is clearly the growth potential in the business. So if you're buying a business that has been flat and has always been flat and will always be flat, the multiple will be one thing. If you're buying a business that's growing 10% a year and has done that for 5 years in a row, then the multiple is different because the payback is much quicker. So I think that's where your question around, well, does that make sense to actually have more integration, because then you can scale more quickly, you can do whatever? I don't know. I think the answer. So I think what we want to do is we want to focus on the platform. The concept is you take businesses, you put them on a platform, you give them the ability to actually enhance their margins, so their EBITDA margins, by a number of benefits that we will look for as part of the acquisition. So we will look for, is there cross-selling opportunities which naturally then can cross-sell into each other's customer base? That's a growth potential. Yeah, so that's getting the growth without actually putting together.
Yeah.
Are there buying opportunities because you're using some of the same suppliers, and actually, as a group, we can then look at how do we coordinate some of those activities? Yes. Is there expertise that can be leveraged across the group? So I just mentioned about the more sustainable technologies and that sort of thing. So my idea is we would have an expert or one or two expert companies in the group on different things that then could transfer that knowledge internally into the businesses in order to increase and enhance their ability to raise their performance further. So enhanced value we will create. Now, valuation, as you know, is two principal things: is the multiple and it's the profit. So what I'm saying is, well, the multiple will naturally increase because of risk and demand. The growth is, I guess, arguable as to whether it's better to integrate or not, but certainly what we can do is influence the EBITDA number as well by enhancing the margins of the businesses in the group. On top of that, I think I would say two things. One is, we're not saying that we will not take cost opportunities where it makes sense. So it may make sense over time to have one function that performs a service for other businesses in certain things. It's not to say that everything has to be individual. It's just not the priority. And it will only happen if actually each business agrees that that makes sense to do, because they can get it for cheaper. They're incentivized by their P&L, and therefore it makes sense. Everyone kind of wins. That's the philosophy that I have. And the other thing is, from a value perspective, it's not like it's not like I have a definitive view that I would need. I want to exit the business by then. So yes, the wealth creation aspect is part of it, but it may be that we continue to build this over time. We hold it for longer, and we create something. I'm as much interested in creating a platform that is collaborative in nature, so people and the businesses can collaborate together. We create a framework to do that. And actually, for me, that's. I would love to stand back in 5 years' time and say we've got a group that's actually working like that, and we've created value for each of those businesses, each of the customers that they serve, and each of the suppliers that they serve as well, and the stakeholders around them, because of the platform that we put in place. So it's not all about the numbers, but for me, obviously the numbers are part of it. But I think there's enough value in what I've described.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but what a vision. That's great. Now, Sam, in the States, HVAC is it's almost, I mean, it's really hot right now. There's a lot of activity there. There are a lot of searchers looking to buy HVAC businesses. There's a lot of private equity looking to, or already active in HVAC. So it's quite competitive. It's of the kind of its cohort of kind of blue collar businesses, electrical, plumbing. That's kind of, it's kind of often in that same basket. It appears to be the hottest by far, actually. So anyway. Is it not, or is it not super competitive to buy an HVAC business in the UK? Are there other people out there like you doing this, or bigger outfits, private equity outfits doing this?
So I think I think it's not as hot as the US. Number one, and I say that because of all the content that I listen to, consume, people talk to, etc. I hear that a lot in the US. I don't hear it so much. It's not that there aren't people, because part of my network, I know that there are other people in that space. But I come back to, well, it depends where you're looking, doesn't it? So if you're looking at maybe this, the kind of sweet spot, which is here, before you get into here, in terms of where the pyramid is, I think that is not it's not a seller's market still, and therefore the buyer still has some strong leverage in that scope, because there isn't. I think if you go past, for me, if you go past a million of EBIT or EBITDA, it's probably where the demand is a little bit more, and maybe the value is starts to creep up, and therefore it starts to become a little bit more expensive. But then hence the multiple arbitrage piece that we talked about before. So the three businesses that let's assume that we close the one next week, fingers crossed. The three businesses will be about 15 million pounds in revenue, and about 1.5 million pounds in EBITDA. Now, so that's an average of just under £500,000 pounds each in terms of EBITDA for the business. So from a typical, I guess, searcher point of view, that's probably on the small side in terms of that individual business. And therefore, maybe maybe at that 1 million plus is you're going to get more of that. But I think that's at that level. There's not a huge amount of demand given the number of businesses there are at that level.
I'm sorry, at the smaller level.
At the smaller level, yeah.
Okay.
So I think the sweet spot, I think, is between 500,000 and 1 million of EBITDA. I think is the sweet spot for me and what we would look at. I mean, I would look bigger. I typically won't look smaller now, because I think it's just perhaps not worth the effort, because the process is largely the same. It's actually more difficult to finance smaller deals, as you'll probably know, and therefore I think sub 500,000 I think becomes less interesting. But if you went sub 500,000, I mean, probably the value is even cheaper.
But in fact, your first acquisition was sub 500,000.
It was,
and we're just about to get into that. The audience is saying, "Come on, get to the. Can we hear the story for Pete's sake?" But Just want to comment that on the sweet spot that you just described, $500,000 to $1 million in EBITDA. That's exactly what we say here. Maybe a little bit more than $500,000, 600-700 to $1 million is kind of the sweet spot that people talk about here for a self-funded searcher. Okay, I thought there was something else on HVAC that I wanted to ask you about. All right. Maybe not. It may, or maybe it'll come to me. So let's get into your first acquisition. So you started, actually, if you don't mind, Sam, tell people how old you are.
44.
44. Okay. And you set out on your acquisition, like started searching like officially, seriously in December? No, that was when you made the acquisition.
That's when we made the acquisition. It took about 4.5 months, and it was probably, 4 months or so prior to that in terms of searching, 4 or 5 months. So, So what is that? 6, 4, 4. About 15 months or so 16 months ago.
That you started. Okay.
Yeah.
And so about 8 months of searching. Yeah.
Searched plus the deal process, right, before closing. Yeah. And about 7 months post completion. Yeah.
Great. And so you acquired this first business in December 2021.
Yep.
And so, okay, so now let's get into it. If you would share the size of the business, the EBITDA of the business, the terms of the deal, if you would, and then, and well, I'll just say at the outset here. So I know that the EBITDA was about 350, and
yep,
we just heard you say that you wouldn't buy less than $500,000 now in EBITDA. But just looking ahead to our conversation, what I would say on that is, like, it did get you in the game, and I think that there's a lot of value in that, because now you've got 2 other acquisitions that have happened in short order, and now you're looking at, if assuming this third deal closes, you're looking at you're at EBITDA at 1.4 million. So in the content that you may have consumed, and here in the States, there's often this debate for searchers about, buy big or buy small. Despite what I just said about the sweet spot being 750 to $1 million or 600 to $1 million, there are still those who say just don't overplay that. In some people would argue it's more important to just get in the game, because if nothing else, that really unlocks deal flow often. So if you find a business doing 400 EBITDA, consider it. There's value in just getting in the game. So with all that, please tell us about your first acquisition. Yeah.
So and I'd like to respond to that. So if I don't respond, then remind me on those points. So I actually found. So I was looking in different places, talking to brokers, contacting businesses directly. This lead actually came through a contact on Search Funder, actually, on the platform. So that's that was interesting, because I was kind of registered there. It wasn't registered with a broker, but with an accountant who was the company's accountant. The process, so the business is actually does all the heating and plumbing elements of new build residential homes. So when you get like large developments of 100 homes, 200 homes, etc., so they're fairly large scale contracts. That's the kind of core of what the business does. It's not a consumer based business. It's working for big, large developers, effectively.
Yeah.
And the conversation was, quite reasonable, I think, in terms of expectations. There was a little bit of back and forth around where we ended up. The business was about £5 million turnover business, about 350 in terms of EBITDA. So it's probably average margins, if not maybe a bit on the low side for the industry, but not far from average. And we agreed in the end. We had a couple of goes at the structure because the numbers changed halfway through, and we renegotiated a little bit the deal, where I agreed to pay a little bit less if I paid a little bit more up front. So in the end, we settled on a multiple of, I think it was 3 exactly, 3x of the underlying EBITDA that we sort of went through a process of understanding what the underlying EBITDA was. So we structured that in a I think it was 2/3 up front and 1/3 that was then deferred over a three-year period, and that's typically the kind of structure, 3 or 4 years that we would look to sort of annual equal installments in terms of those numbers. The way we financed that is we had, as I said, I had some people that I was working with that were also investing a little bit. I also had some other contacts that were that I approached in terms of investment who are willing to pledge also some capital for the next sort of 2 or 3 deals, which they have done in terms of where we've got to for these 3. And so we put down an equity element. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was probably close to 20% of the value in equity. Obviously, then there's some deferred, and the rest we got a cash flow lend from an alternative lender here in the UK. And you touched on it earlier. It's quite complicated to do that. You can typically have the asset-based lenders, but in these types of businesses, there's not a lot of assets. The only assets they have really is the debtor book. I didn't really want to go down that path because you start messing around with impacting customers and who the customers pay, and actually it's quite expensive when you work it through. It's a little bit more complex, and so I opted for. I had a couple of options, but I opted for a lender that was willing to give a cash flow lend. But the term of those is nothing like what you get in the US. We dream about those terms and those deals. So you're paying considerably more from an interest perspective, and the term is over 5 years, and it's amortized. There's typically 1 year capital repayment free, so interest only for 1 year, which gives you a little bit of breathing space and to build the cash number, and then the rest amortized over the 4 years. So that's what we did, and the agreement with that lender was also they were interested in the buy and build approach and the project plan, and actually that particular acquisition was below the minimum threshold for them. So they actually sort of we had a credit approved amount, let's say, of double what we used for the first business, but always with the intention of doing more going forward. So that's how we financed the first deal, and that's what the structure looked like. I would say the other 2 deals are not dissimilar to that in terms of multiples, and therefore that for me at that kind of level, the $500,000-ish kind of level, is you're looking at probably a 3x EBITDA number, and if you'll typically have to put in, not in all cases, there are more creative structures I understand than people have done without putting it in equity at all. I just think it's much harder to do, and also it's more risky. Obviously you have more leverage in the business, so that structure is kind of typical for the other 2 deals that we've got, so all on similar structures, working with the same lender, although that's been a bit painful. The process is a bit painful, but hopefully we'll get the 3rd one across the line next week.
Sam, so a couple differences with what my American audience might be used to hearing in terms of the deal, on the terms of the deal, the seller note, one thing. So you said about a third, so a 33% seller note.
Yep.
Whereas in the States, it's typically going to be 5, 10, 15% is more common, maybe 20%. And so of course, as you said, the amortization. So with that shorter amortization schedule, then your debt burden is going to be much heavier. On the other hand, you're financing a much less. It's much less leverage. So if it was 20% equity, 33% to your seller notes, so that's 53%. So roughly 47% of the deals is coming from the bank. So that's a smaller sum. So I guess that kind of cancels out the fact that you have a more aggressive amortization schedule, and you end up with a debt burden that maybe is kind of similar to what a U.S. searcher would experience. Would you say?
You still got the challenge that you've got debt either way. So you've got debt either from a seller note perspective or from a bank perspective. So in reality, what it does do is it makes the numbers tighter. Obviously, with a 10-year amortization and an interest that's 4 or 5% or whatever it is that you guys will have access to, that makes it far easier to meet the debt service cover ratios, which effectively is the key ratios that the lenders will look at. It makes it far easier. Not only it makes it far easier, it gives you more flexibility about the price that you pay. Now, I'm not saying that you want to pay more, but for example, it just simply doesn't work to pay more than. So even if we had a great business that was $1 million EBITDA, that had everything right with it, and it was clearly worth more than 3x, you probably couldn't pay more than 4x because the numbers just simply wouldn't work from a debt coverage perspective. Now, clearly, that's when the private equity guys and trade buyers, etc., are more interested in that, and they can afford to pay a bit more, and therefore maybe you get a bit priced out at that level because it just simply doesn't work. So yeah, I mean, it's a tighter remit to work with to make those numbers work, and there are the lenders in the UK. So really, I think it's a disappointing set of alternatives and options for people in the UK, and I think the government should look at that, because I think as a result of that, I think we'll end up having a lot of businesses that just have got nowhere to go because there's just not enough options to do. And one of the reasons, and coming back to one of the points you said about buy big or small, I think it's a great point. It's a great question. Actually, I don't mind buying a slightly smaller for the first one because it's the first one. And actually, I want to do 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, etc. So really, it doesn't matter so much. And you're absolutely right. It gets you in the door, gets you in the game, and things become infinitely easier as a result. Both lending conversations, investor conversations with sellers, because you're credible, you've got a business in this space, just changes the dynamic. So you're absolutely right. On the flip side, if this was going to be your only business, then maybe I would hold out for a bit for a bigger business, if that makes sense, because the process is still the same, and it's obviously going to take you longer to grow. And the other thing is, it typically is more difficult to finance. So actually, I'm surprised in the end that I managed to get that one through, because. And I see the debt markets tightening a little bit, given where inflation is going and everything else, and the risk appetite is reducing. I think getting anything done that's sub sort of 400,000 EBITDA is more challenging from a lender perspective. They just don't want to know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sam, give us just for other British listeners, and maybe European listeners who, again, non-SBA buyers, is a bit of the lay of the land. So as I recall, there weren't many lenders like you that you could find that understood the buy then build model in the UK. So just finding somebody. Yes, you found a bank to do it, but like it was hard. First of all, do you want to give your that bank a shout out, just because maybe save some people some people some time? Like if it took you looking under a lot of rocks.
Well, what I would say is
contact
people contact me, because ordinarily I would say yes, but the experience over the recent weeks has not been been what I would have expected and hoped, and therefore I don't want to plug something that for me at the moment is not perfect. Albeit I was very happy with the first process. I think the challenge now, as I said, is in recent weeks the inflation's gone through the roof. Our first business has had some implications of that because of the nature of the business model. It had a lot of fixed price contracts with its customers, therefore margins have been squeezed. It's still profitable, but it's not profitable where we wanted it to be. So we've explained all of that, and it's kind of understood, but that's put some more concern, let's say, behind future deals, even though we're changing the focus on the business model a little bit to be less risky from that perspective. I think the risk appetite is reduced. We were also moving between one fund and another fund in terms of where the money was coming from. That gave some complications. So there's a whole host of external circumstances that meant actually the process has been far more painful this time. But I would say, yeah, if anyone wants to contact me, I'm happy to kind of then talk them through that. And but I think it's probably not appropriate for me at the moment to kind of plug something that I'm still waiting for the final outcome of.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. One of the other things that strikes me about this first business that you acquired is that it's new construction versus maintenance. So one of the things here that is often talked about in these types of home services businesses, or businesses like deal with the hardware of the home, is it construction? And obviously maintenance is what you want, because it might not be recurring, but it's reoccurring and so on. So you're nodding your head. Obviously, you understood that dichotomy, but you still went for new construction. Like more of the revenue comes from new construction. Was there did you need to get comfortable with that? Did you need to get your lender comfortable with that? Was that a question? Did you tell yourself, well, this is only my first acquisition, so subsequent acquisitions, I'll be more focused on getting a maintenance heavy business sort of thing? What was your thought there?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think a couple of things. Firstly, I knew that this was my first and it wasn't going to be my only. So when it comes to looking at the entire portfolio, you're going to have a bigger, more sort of recurring contractual maintenance component. Secondly, what this business had, for the good, and now actually almost then it's kind of come back to bite me to a certain extent, is it had some certainty of revenue, because the contracts they had, most of them spanned the next 12, 18 months. So, we could predict quite easily that the next 12 months, 18 months revenue, we've already got. We've got a contract for that. So there's very little risk in delivering the next 12, 18 months, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that got me comfortable, and everyone comfortable that, you had a good pipeline of business that was already committed, and you've got bunch of tenders that are out there as well. So, we feel quite comfortable with that. The issue is the way that it works in new build construction is typically you're looking at, having to fix the prices that you give, which is fine in a normal environment. And over the last 10 years hasn't really been an issue. The issue is literally the last 15 months has seen inflation go through the roof on materials, especially, which has meant that we've had to kind of pedal quite quickly to renegotiate some of those contracts and to make sure we're doing everything from a supplier-based point of view and those sorts of things. So that's why I got comfortable, because we had predictability of revenue, at least for a window in advance. And secondly, that I knew that, yes, we could also build out as part of the group the maintenance component. What we also want to do with this first business is actually grow the consumer side of the business, which is a lot more maintenance driven, because it has the infrastructure to build off. It's about 5, 6, 7% of the business today, and we believe that can be 25% of the business in a few years. So that again will naturally de-risk. And the other point is obviously the price that you pay is dependent. If you've got a business that is is 100% maintenance, that's got recurring or reoccurring revenue, then the price tag is going to be probably a little bit higher.
Yeah, sure. Great. Thank you for that. We're going a little long here, Sam, but I have a few more important questions I want to ask you. One is circling back to your the overall structure of what you're building. You are not an owner operator. You're assembling these businesses, and so are the sellers, who I presume are oftentimes the founders, are they staying in the business as general managers? And so what's that look like?
No, it's a combination, but again, it's another sort of great point. I mean, these are the kind of crux questions, right? So, in two of the businesses, the owner will leave, and the number two, that's kind of the natural number two in those businesses, will step up. And in the first case, has already stepped up to be MD. In the other case, which was the one we closed last week, a couple of weeks ago, the owner is staying. So it wanted to be in an environment where it could help him scale the business and grow the business going forward. As part of that deal, obviously part of the future component or the deferred component we have as an earnout, so performance based. In the other two we don't, if the seller is leaving. So there's that kind of difference, I guess, nuance. But yeah, what we look for is either one of those two options. Either there's a very clear number two that actually naturally can step up, or that the seller is wanting to continue in the business and wants to maybe play a bigger role in the group.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And in the cases where the number two is going to step up, is that negotiated and agreed upon before the transaction occurs? I mean, do you, because you Sam have to get comfortable with that number two yourself as part of your due diligence.
It's a really tricky one, because in the first case, obviously from a seller point of view, they're in a tricky situation as well, because they can't bring other people on board, because if the deal doesn't happen, then that puts them, jeopardizes their own position and contradicts their own sort of authority, if you like, because people then understand that they're going to wanting to sell. So it's a very difficult balance, and in that case we left it very late to get that contact with the number two. So we took a bit of a risk there, to be honest, and we got the CV, we got the background, but yeah, it was 2 weeks before the deal completed that we actually got to speak to the number two. So that was a bit, but it turns out for me, I think there's a great opportunity with him to develop him as well, and I think he's doing a great job stepping up. So that's worked out well. In the other business where the number two is stepping up, the owner brought him on into the picture quite early in the process, and therefore we've met, we've discussed, we've kind of talked. We've been able to have that dialogue through the process.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine for these number twos, it's really big news. I mean, a common theme in this world is that the team that you're acquiring, just the change in ownership, it can feel very disruptive and unsettling to the larger team. Just the change in ownership, but for these number twos, they're not only getting a new boss, they're getting the promotion of their lives all at once. Yeah. And you worry that a number two might say, look, I don't want to, they might just say, thank you. No, I just don't want to be, I don't want that level of responsibility, even though it represents progress in my career.
Yeah. And I think it's really a critical one to navigate carefully that aspect. And I think when we start to build out the group a little bit more, so for example, I'm in the process now of recruiting a CFO from a group perspective, because it just makes sense with now three looking at more to actually have that. But part of their role will be to go and spend time with each of the businesses, helping them to improve the way they govern the business, the information they have in the business, etc. So it's to kind of help bring up, and also going forward we'll have maybe one or two other roles at a group level that can really be supporting the businesses. But at the moment, for me, for example, big part of my emphasis will be really supporting those people. Now, I'm not an industry expert, so they've got the expertise typically when it comes to the industry, but actually they're stepping up from a more junior role to a more senior role, which has implications, right? So I think to be really close to them through that process, we're looking at how we can build a program around developing the MDs and all be them have sort of some external development and coaching, etc., as running the businesses. We're also looking to implement probably an operating system, so we'll work on the same basis in terms of I don't know if you've heard of the whether we choose this or not to be seen, but the EOS system.
Sure.
So that is something that we're looking at closely and probably will go with, I think, which will be really helpful, because we'll probably have some facilitation with that. So it'll be helpful for those guys also to give them the framework to help them to manage, because typically, the frameworks in this business around, even having a very clear strategy to how you manage performance just isn't really there, and how do we know whether we're doing a good job each week? It's very through feeling versus any kind of data metrics, who's accountable for what, all these things that can, I think, be developed. So yeah, a lot of careful support and development and investment in those people, I think, is required, and not to be underestimated. And I think that's probably something I did underestimate, and something that now we're trying to make sure that we're focusing on providing that support.
Well, although on the other hand, one of the big boxes you wanted to check with this whole pivot in your career was to develop people. Yep. And so I guess since you're insulated from the teams because you're sitting, at corporate, if you will, above, really the only individuals that you'll interact with directly on any sort of regular basis will be the what did you call them? The MDs, or what we would call them here, the general managers. And so those are the people that Sam is going to be developing, that's scratching that itch of you wanting to develop people.
Yes, but also I think there's, for example, the typically the finance managers, the people managing that function in a business, because I'm naturally that way, I tend to spend a lot of time with them as well already, so helping them as well. So I would say it was not just the general manager, so we'll be a little bit more involved, and I'll sit in the management meetings every week with the general manager and his team.
Oh,
so I'll be a little bit involved in helping them through transition as we kind of set the new kind of structure, frameworks and stuff in place. And because obviously the first business has had some challenges from a margin erosion perspective, it's then being called me to sort of be more involved, I would say, week to week, operationally, to support what do we need to do to turn the corner and actually deliver the right set of actions to this. So it's a bit of a hybrid at the moment. I think going forward it will be more general manager only, but at the moment it will be a little bit more hands-on. So I will be, at the moment, for example, probably 1 day a week in each business, the 3 businesses. For the coming couple of months at least, whilst also looking for the next ones.
So these businesses then are all geographically close to you?
All within an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes, something like that.
And where do you live?
Just north of London.
Okay.
So
one question, then we're going to wrap up here, about the cultural fit between somebody buying a business and a blue collar business, and then the team that operates at that business. Oftentimes it's kind of a white collar person, somebody with a financial or corporate background buying a blue collar business, and there can be a difference of culture there, to say the least. The UK, I mean, I've heard English people themselves say, this isn't my American stereotyping the Brits, but I've heard English people themselves say that the kind of class still plays a greater role in the UK than maybe other places. So it's like that those strata are more felt among people than in other places. Correct me if that stereotype is totally off. But so that would just kind of make more pronounced the difference between white and blue collar folks. Anything you want to say to all that?
I think it's a point to be. It's another point in terms of, for me, the difference between actually somebody, and no disrespect to somebody that's come out of business school, done their MBA, got all the theory, got all the PowerPoint decks ready to go. The difference between somebody like that and somebody perhaps like me, who's had years of experience of leading, managing large teams, of actually going to the ground, being on the ground with people, and actually being able to span that difference, like I said to you before, is, yes, I understand the corporate stuff and what needs to happen, big picture, and all of that. But I'm also humble enough to actually roll my sleeves up and say, right, how the hell do we get out of this, and actually be on the front line. And I think that for me would be a watch out, because I see, even my corporate life, I see people coming in fresh, think they know everything, and it's like, you have no effing clue how the reality works. I mean, you just don't. And I think sometimes you have to have the experience to know, and also have the credibility. So if people know that you've done X, Y, and Z, you're so much more credible. And I think there is a big watch out, I would say, for for people, and coming in from that, not a lot of experience, going into that blue collar environment, or any environment really, in terms of managing and leading people, teams, P&Ls. The reality is not all, is not all roses. It's tough sometimes. It's difficult sometimes. The PowerPoint goes out the window. It's about actually you're dealing with local emotions with people, which is very, small businesses can be quite rife, and it's very different to corporate culture in that regard. And you have to be quite careful about what you say and how you say it, and all those things. And the emphasis on just team and bringing people on the same page is really, really important. And that's not, I don't think that's taught to you necessarily at business school and doing that stuff. And I think there's a big watch out. And I would be hesitant for somebody to come in that hasn't got real life experience and say, there you go, drop you into that. I mean, I'm not saying it can't be done. Clearly it has been done time and time again. But for me, I would just imagine it in one of the businesses that we have, and the pushback would be enormous.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's just, I guess it's a watch out for people, and try and be humble, try and be on the same page, try and understand, try not to impose. We need to do this from day one. At least in my mind, the first weeks are around learning and understanding, and not about, right, you're doing this wrong and that wrong. I mean, it's like, yeah, you probably can see they're doing this wrong and that wrong, but you have to bite your tongue. So is that experience, I think, is really important. And I think giving that some really intentional thought, if you are in that camp of not a lot of experience going into it to own a business, place an emphasis on that and get some support on that, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, at least two of my guests have said 6 months that they won't touch anything. They won't make any recommendation, just 6 months. They're students. And one of the other points I'll just make here that my guests have made, and I'm just repeating, is that often when you see something in a business that you've acquired that you think is wrong, you learn maybe 2 months later, oh, that's why it was done that way. There was a method to the madness. Good thing I didn't try to correct it, because I would have been wrong to try to correct it, because it wasn't correct. My interpretation was incorrect. Yeah.
I think that's right. I think 6 months is depends on the circumstance. I mean, sometimes maybe you can do it much quicker than that, but give yourself some time, I think, is the point. Yeah.
Sam, last question. I want to circle back all the way back to what we talked about in your own plan to build wealth for yourself. And like you have a certain number, that, X number equals helping Y people. So can you add some more color to that and numbers behind that? And we'll close out with this. Yeah.
So what I want to have from this venture is a £20 million.
I love it.
£20 million exit, and I say exit, but more exit that's for me. So in terms of, I have investors involved, so I don't have 100% of the equity. I have the majority of the equity, but the way that plays out is to build the group to about 60 million in revenue. This is pounds, 60 million revenue, and about 10% EBITDA margin, so 6 million, and selling it just under 6 is the business case. I think we've got so 5.7 or something like that in terms of multiple. We're buying at 3.5 is what the business case suggests. So that, plus the fact that you've got then the investors obviously to get the return that we've promised, plus whatever debt's left over, etc., would get you to the 20 in terms of the exit. So that's what we're trying to aim for.
And that is within 5 years. I recognize that maybe that's not super specific, but is that at least a rough timeline?
Yeah, the business plan is 26. Yeah, so it's actually, that's 4 years from now, effectively. So we were supposed to be at 22 million, for example, at the end of this calendar year, December. So that means 1 or 2 more businesses this year. So it's very sort of clearly stepped up. So the next 2 years really focus on acquisition, and then a year or two, 18 months of really sort of bedding down and actually helping, develop all of those benefits across the group that we talked about earlier.
And really, I mean, you can do such an accelerated acquisition plan because you're not doing much in these businesses. I mean, yeah, you're trying to improve them and many of the things that we talked about, but you're not because there's not this big integration process that's happening with all of these, like you buy them and you just let them continue on with the improvements that you put in place and the learning and the education, all that good stuff. But they're not really disruptive. They can kind of, these acquisition being acquired for these businesses is not really that disruptive. They can continue on their merry way.
It's incremental, isn't it? So it's incremental. So yes, we're going to sort of provide an operating system, whether it's a EOS or something that helps businesses on the same page, create a vision, create a clear scorecard, create clear accountability charts, create clear governance and frequency and all that kind of stuff. That's just good management in terms of a small business. Yes, we're going to help in terms of the collaboration across the group and how we put that together. Yes, we're going to help in terms of some of the strategic skills, financial skills that we'll have at the group level. And yes, there might be some savings that we can do along the way in terms of operating things once on behalf of the group. But apart from that, the core of the business will be borne out depending on the strategy that we develop together with the MDs or the general managers of the business. And it will be, like you say, it will be a little bit more incremental as opposed to transformative in terms of each individual business. Yeah.
The $20 million number, how did you arrive at that number? Why is that your goal?
It's pounds, not dollars, although there's not not so much difference these days.
Yeah. 20 million pounds.
I mean, I've got some calculations behind, but I think it stemmed from the amounts that the quickness of the amount that I want to deploy into these vehicles around philanthropic elements, alongside the amount that I would still need to create or have some wealth to live and whatever else. So I've got some calculations around that and what I think we can do with that. Now, that might change, right? We might decide that this is going so well and we're thinking too small and we should be looking at bigger and we should be looking at this and maybe that changes. But that for me is probably a year old now in terms of that set of numbers.
Great. Thank you for sharing this. I love the transparency. And Sam, do you this is a leading question. Do you wish you had started doing this 10 years ago?
Yes, I do. Although I would say probably not before 10 years ago. So maybe 5 years ago would have been optimum. And the reason I say that is because the experience for me in traveling around the world, in all the different experiences, regardless of the fact that I didn't enjoy the last few years, the experience and what I learned from all of that, I think was invaluable. And I think the just the traveling aspect, when you think back about all the places I've managed to be and spend time with and see, and is phenomenal. And I wouldn't take that back. So maybe a few years earlier, because I think then we could have done even more. But I don't disregard the value that I've had, and I'm very thankful for that in terms of the career that I've had as well.
Yeah, it does sound like a phenomenal experience to have had such a global experience for those years.
Yeah,
Sam, what a conversation! Thank you. This was great. Really cool to hear from somebody across the pond doing things slightly differently, and but many things are the same. And just a really refreshing and cool to hear what you're doing.
So, great to be on, and thanks for having me, Will. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Well, we'll have to have you back and see how the progress is going. Thanks, Sam.